The desert sun blazed mercilessly over Nellis Air Force Base as Captain Mara Keene walked across the shimmering tarmac, her flight helmet tucked under her arm. At 32, she'd already logged more combat hours than most pilots would see in their entire careers, but nobody at Nellis seemed to remember that. All they saw was the woman assigned to the old F-22 Raptor parked at the far end of the flight line. The aircraft looked like a museum piece next to the gleaming new F-35s. Its paint was faded, panel lines slightly mismatched. Where repairs had been made, and everyone on base had a nickname for it. Hangar Queen, museum piece, sometimes just that thing. Mara heard all of it, but she never responded. Instead, she spent every off-duty hour in the cockpit, updating avionics by hand, swapping worn wiring harnesses, recalibrating sensors until they hummed like new. Her father had been a Raptor mechanic when they were still the pride of the fleet. Growing up on air bases, she'd memorized service manuals while other kids played video games. Now, after 3 tours overseas and assignments on newer aircraft, she'd specifically requested the jet nobody else wanted. She knew what still lived beneath those warm panels. Carl Bradley Malloy had approved her request with a shrug and a note in the margin. Ferry flights only. Not combat certified. Officially, the jet existed for aggressor training, an aerial punching bag to make rookie pilots feel fast. Unofficially, Malloy figured budget cuts would ground it permanently within the year. Across the flight line, the morning briefing was already underway in the squadron-ready room. At its center stood Major Travis Reed, call sign Viper, the base's undefeated dogfight ace. Reed had the kind of easy charisma that filled rooms and won arguments, backed by a kill board that made other pilots nervous. He was discussing next week's readiness demonstration, where 4 squadrons would showcase aerial maneuvers for visiting Pentagon brass. When Mara entered the briefing room, conversations dipped to whispers. She nodded politely to the operations officer, found an empty metal chair in the back row, and waited. Reed's gaze drifted to her name tape, then to the squadron roster on his tablet. A smirk tugged at his lips. "Captain Keene," he called out, voice carrying across the room. "That Raptor of yours even flight-worthy yet?" Mara kept her voice level. "It is. Ran full systems checks at dawn." Reed laughed, turning to address the room. "Look, I love antiques as much as the next guy, but we're running low-fire simulations against modern threat profiles. We need jets that can turn and burn, not something headed back to the boneyard next fiscal year." A ripple of amusement moved through the assembled pilots. Lieutenant Jig Morrison whispered something to his wingman that made them both chuckle. The operations officer tried to redirect the briefing, but Reed pressed on. "Tell you what, Ghost," Reed said, using her call sign with obvious mockery. "Prove that relic can keep up. 5-minute spar. Just you and me. You beat me. You take the last demo slot. You lose. We retire that museum piece to static display where it belongs." The room erupted in barely contained excitement. Someone whistled. Low. Others murmured approval, already calculating odds. Mara studied Reed's expression. Relaxed, certain, already victorious in his own mind. She understood the psychology perfectly. Make the challenge public, and the target either refuses and loses face or accepts and becomes entertainment. She stood slowly, helmet still under her arm. Conditions? Reed shrugged as if discussing lunch plans. Guns only. Visual range engagement. No data-link tricks or beyond visual range missiles. First radar lock wins. Altitude ceiling 15,000. Keep the tower happy. Mara nodded once. I'll meet you at the merge point at 1400 hours. When she left the room, the betting started immediately. Odds ran 10-1 against her. The ground crew assigned to Reed began fueling his cutting-edge F-35 with practiced efficiency. mounting cameras on the wings to capture every angle for debrief footage and social media bragging rights. Mara had only one technician helping her, Staff Sergeant Luis Ruiz, a quiet veteran who'd served with her father years ago. As she performed her pre-flight inspection, he approached with a USB drive. "Last-minute firmware patch," he said quietly. "Should tighten pitch axis response latency." She thanked him, loaded the update, and conducted the most thorough walk-around of her career. Fuel caps secure, tires properly inflated, gun port sealed, control surfaces free and clear. The aircraft bore scuffs and scratches, and the left stabilator still showed primer where new skin had been riveted the previous month, but every bolt felt solid beneath her gloved hands. Climbing into the cockpit felt like coming home. She clicked her harness, keyed the initialization sequence, and watched the HUD bloom to life. Engine temperatures green, fuel flow balanced, all systems nominal. She set the weapons parameters to training mode, but left the flight envelope governors relaxed, an allowance older Raptors carried that let pilots push harder before the computers intervened. It was a feature younger aviators barely remembered because their jets had never needed it. At 13:58 hours, the tower cleared both aircraft for departure. Mara taxied behind Reed, his exhaust heat shimmering like liquid fire in the desert air. When his jet leaped off the runway, she counted 5 heartbeats, then jammed the throttles forward. The Raptor surged skyward, its twin engines howling with a timbre newer birds lacked, a raw, metallic bellow that vibrated deep in her chest. Gear up, flaps retracted. Climbing toward the merge point, where sunlight flared across both canopies like scattered diamonds. Reed's voice crackled over the tactical frequency, casual and confident. "I'll make this painless, Ghost. Show us what Granddad technology can do against the real thing." Mara didn't respond. She was already calculating angles, airspeed, and the precise moment when everything would change. The old bird was about to show them exactly what she could do. The two fighters met at 12,000 feet, converging at a combined speed of nearly Mach 2. Reed initiated with a classic high yo-yo maneuver, pulling his F-35 into a climbing turn designed to force Mara into an energy trap. It was textbook, the kind of move that looked impressive and usually worked against inexperienced pilots. But Mara had been flying combat missions when Reed was still in flight school. She rolled inverted and pulled into a descending barrel turn, bleeding airspeed deliberately while forcing him to react. His jet followed nose tracking, but the older Raptor's relaxed flight limits allowed her to pivot tighter than his newer aircraft software permitted. His helmet-mounted sight tried to maintain lock, tone warbling uncertainly. Then she did something that made the control tower fall silent. Mara jerked the Raptor vertical, throttles blazing, angle of attack spiking beyond what any test pilot manual recommended. Buffeting hammered the airframe as she felt the wings bite air, nearly stall, then recover on pure thrust and instinct. Reed overshot by 900 meters. She slid in behind his tail like a shadow. Radar pinged steady. Missile lock chirped. She squeezed the trigger. "Fox 2. Virtual kill," she announced calmly. Silence filled the tactical frequency for 3 long seconds. Then the tower controller's voice, tight with disbelief. "Kill confirmed for Ghost. Engaged pilot returned to blue status." Reed's response was a mixture of disbelief and barely contained profanity. "She got lucky," he muttered. The tower controller hesitated. "Reset approved. Stand by for second engagement." This time, Reed went vertical immediately, forcing a rolling scissors maneuver. Mara throttled harder, trading fuel for altitude, then snapped into a split S that used gravity to swing her beneath him and completely out of his field of view. At the bottom of the maneuver, she pulled 9 Gs, blood pooling in her legs as she clenched against the crushing force. Her vision tunneled, but the Raptor held together. She exploded upward like a missile and caught Reed crossing left to right. His countermeasure flares sparkling uselessly against the blue sky. Lock tone. Trigger pull. Fox 2. Second kill. This time, the tower didn't wait for commentary. Engagement terminated. Ghost achieves 2 kills, 0 losses. Mara leveled out, breathing steady, adrenaline flowing through her veins like clean fire. Reed's F-35 slid alongside hers at a respectful distance. When his voice returned over the radio, it carried something she hadn't heard before, respect mixed with genuine confusion. "Guess the antiques still got teeth," he admitted quietly. "Depends on the pilot," she replied. They landed minutes apart, Reed first, then Mara. Ground crews converged from all directions, some cheering, others stunned into silence. Colonel Malloy watched from the edge of the apron, arms folded, expression unreadable as stone. When Mara climbed down from her cockpit, Sergeant Ruiz handed her the flight printout. 2 kills, 0 system faults. She tucked the paper under her arm and walked toward the operations building, helmet swinging lightly at her side. Malloy intercepted her halfway across the tarmac. He studied the flight data, then her face, then the cooling aircraft behind them. "You just put the oldest fighter on this base at the top of our readiness chart," he said finally. Mara met his eyes without flinching. "Sir, age is maintenance. Skill is currency." Malloy gave a grudging nod. "We'll need to recalibrate some opinions around here." Across the tarmac, Reed removed his helmet slowly, staring at the Raptor as if seeing it, and her, for the first time. The casual smirks from earlier had vanished completely. He wasn't angry exactly. He looked rewired, forced to recalculate truths he thought were carved in stone. In the control tower, a communication light blinked, a direct line from the Pentagon. Malloy answered, listened for 30 seconds, then looked at Mara with something approaching surprise. "The Undersecretary for Acquisition just heard about your flight," he said. "They want to observe tomorrow's full demonstration. And Captain?" He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. "They specifically requested you in that jet." Mara allowed herself a single nod. She didn't smile, didn't need to. The sky had already done all the talking necessary. But as she walked away, she could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation, every assumption being quietly reconsidered. The old bird had just reminded everyone why raptors had once ruled the skies. And tomorrow, she'd have an even bigger audience to convince. Word of the dogfight spread through Nellis like wildfire. By evening chow, every pilot, mechanic, and support staff member had heard some version of the story. In the officers' club, conversations stopped when Mara entered. Some pilots nodded respectfully. Others turned away, unwilling to acknowledge what they'd witnessed. But not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. Lieutenant Colonel Derek Ashford, Reed's squadron commander and a vocal advocate for phasing out the F-22 program entirely, called an emergency meeting the next morning. His corner office overlooked the flight line, where Mara's Raptor sat prominently among the newer aircraft like a weathered veteran among recruits. "Gentlemen," Ashford began, addressing his senior pilots, "yesterday's little air show doesn't change our fundamental assessment. One lucky engagement doesn't validate an obsolete platform." Reed, still smarting from his defeat, nodded eagerly. "She caught me off guard with some old-school maneuvers. Won't happen again." "Exactly," Ashford continued. "The Pentagon's sending observers today, and we need to demonstrate why the F-35 represents our future. I want Keen's participation minimized." Captain Mike Torres, Reed's usual wingman, leaned forward. "What are you suggesting, sir?" Ashford smiled coldly. "The demonstration involves multiple engagement scenarios, complex threat environments, electronic warfare countermeasures. Our ancient avionics can't handle modern battlefield conditions. He tapped his tablet. I'm restructuring today's exercise. 4-on-1 scenario. Keen versus our top pilots in a beyond visual range engagement. Let's see how her museum piece performs against coordinated attacks with active jamming. The room fell quiet. Even Reed looked uncomfortable. Sir, that's not exactly a fair fight, ... Fair? Ashford's voice hardened. War isn't fair, Major. If she wants to play with the big boys, she needs to prove she can handle real combat scenarios, not some gentleman's duel from the 1940s. Unknown to them, Staff Sergeant Ruiz was replacing a burned-out light fixture. In the hallway outside, through the partially open door, he heard every word. The old mechanic's face darkened as he recognized what was happening. He'd seen it before. Pilots using rank and politics to settle scores they couldn't win in the air. An hour later, Ruiz found Mara performing her pre-flight inspection. She was methodically checking each control surface, her movements precise, and unhurried despite the growing crowd of observers gathering near the flight line. Captain, Ruiz said quietly, you need to know something. He told her about Ashford's meeting, the planned ambush disguised as a demonstration. Mara listened, without expression, her hands never pausing in their inspection routine. 4 against 1, active jamming, BVR engagement. She repeated, anything else? They're betting you'll refuse the mission parameters when they spring it on you. Make you look like you're backing down. Mara completed her walk-around and turned to face the mechanic. Sergeant, what's the maximum range of an AIM 120 in our current atmospheric conditions? Ruiz calculated quickly. Approximately 60 nautical miles, depending on altitude and target aspect. And the effective range of our APG-77 radar in passive mode? 100+ miles with proper management. Mara nodded slowly. Then we have options they don't expect. Across the tarmac, a convoy of black SUVs was arriving. Pentagon officials climbed out, along with representatives from defense contractors and senior Air Force leadership. Among them was General Patricia Hayes, the first woman to hold the position of Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. Her presence elevated the demonstration from routine exercise to career-defining moment. Colonel Malloy approached the VIP viewing area, clearly nervous about the high-level attention. Ashford joined him, looking confident and self-satisfied. Reed and his wingmen were already suiting up, their F-35s being armed with training missiles and electronic warfare pods. At 1,000 hours, the briefing began in the main conference room. Mara entered to find the seating arranged with her. Isolated at one end of the table, facing a panel of senior officers and defense officials. The power dynamic was deliberately intimidating. Ashford stood at the presentation screen. Today's demonstration will showcase integrated 5th-generation capabilities in a complex threat environment, he announced. Captain Keen will play the role of a legacy threat aircraft attempting to penetrate a coordinated defense. General Hayes raised an eyebrow. 4 against 1 seems excessive for a demonstration. Modern conflicts involve overwhelming numerical superiority and electronic warfare capabilities. Ashford replied smoothly. We need to test how legacy systems perform under realistic pressure. Mara remained silent, studying the tactical display. The engagement area stretched across 200 square miles of restricted airspace, with multiple terrain features that could provide concealment. The rules heavily favored beyond visual range combat, where newer missiles and radar systems typically dominated. Captain Keen, General Hayes addressed her directly. Do you accept these mission parameters? The room held its breath. Everyone expected her to object, to demand more reasonable odds, to reveal the uncertainty they assumed she must be feeling. Instead, Mara stood calmly, Yes, ma'am. I'll need 30 minutes to complete final systems checks. Ashford's confident smile faltered slightly. Reed looked genuinely concerned. He knew her capabilities now and understood she wasn't walking into this blindly. As the meeting dispersed, General Hayes approached Mara privately. Captain, you don't have to prove anything here. This setup feels more like a setup than a fair assessment. Mara met the General's eyes. Ma'am, respectfully, I've been proving myself my entire career. Today, I'm proving something about the aircraft. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. But remember, sometimes the smartest pilot is the one who lives to fight another day. Walking back to her aircraft, Mara felt the weight of expectation and skepticism pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. 4 of the base's best pilots, flying the most advanced fighters in the world, supported by electronic warfare. Systems designed to blind and confuse enemy aircraft. But as she climbed into the Raptor's cockpit and began her startup sequence, she felt something else. The quiet confidence of a pilot who'd learned long ago that the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. The real fight was about to begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nevada desert as 5 fighters lifted off from Nellis Air Force Base. From the VIP observation area, the assembled Pentagon officials watched through binoculars as the aircraft spread across the vast training airspace like pieces on a chessboard. Mara climbed to 25,000 feet in radio silence, her Raptor's radar in passive mode, gathering information without revealing her position. Through her headset, she could hear the coordination chatter from Reed's 4-ship formation as they established their combat air patrol pattern. Their confidence was audible. 4 modern F-35s with active electronic jamming against 1 old F-22. The math seemed simple. But Mara had fought in places where math meant nothing and survival depended on thinking 3 moves ahead of your opponent. Ghost, this is Control. The voice of the exercise director crackled through her headset. Acknowledge ready status. Ghost ready, she replied calmly. Viper flight, status? Viper flight ready. 4-ship and wall formation. Jammers active. In the observation bunker, Ashford leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. On the tactical display, 4 blue icons moved in perfect coordination, while a single red dot, Mara's Raptor, appeared isolated and outnumbered. General Hayes watched silently, her expression unreadable. Exercise begins ... now. Immediately. Mara's radar warning receiver lit up like a Christmas tree. The F-35s were painting her with multiple targeting radars, while their jamming pods created a wall of electronic noise. In a normal engagement, her radar would be useless, her missiles confused, her situational awareness reduced to whatever she could see through her canopy. But the F-22 wasn't a normal aircraft, and Mara wasn't a normal pilot. She killed her active radar entirely and switched to passive sensors, using the enemy's own radar emissions to track their positions. The Raptor's advanced electronic warfare suite, often overlooked in favor of its stealth capabilities, began sorting through the jamming signals like a cryptographer breaking code. Contact, bearing 020, range unknown. Reed's voice cut through the radio chatter. Attempting lock. Mara smiled behind her oxygen mask. They'd found her exactly where she wanted to be found. She pushed the Raptor into a steep dive, dropping altitude rapidly while the F-35s maneuvered to intercept. Their formation began to spread as they tried to bracket her escape routes. But the maneuver revealed something critical, a gap in their electronic coverage as they repositioned. For exactly 3 seconds, Mara's passive sensors captured clean positioning data on all 4 aircraft. 3 seconds was enough. She pulled out of the dive and went vertical, climbing at an angle to put the sun directly behind her. The F-35s, tracking on radar, lost visual contact as she disappeared into the solar glare. Their electronic systems continued to track her, but now they faced a problem they hadn't anticipated. The F-22's radar cross-section from head-on was smaller than a marble. "Where is she?" someone called over the radio. "Last contact bearing 180, climbing. I've got multiple false returns. Jamming isn't working." Mara leveled off at 35,000 feet, well above the F-35's current altitude, and activated her radar for a single focus sweep. In that brief moment, she painted all 4 targets and calculated firing solutions. Then she went dark again, rolling inverted and diving back toward the fight. What happened next would be analyzed in tactical schools for years to come. She approached. From high altitude, invisible to their radar and concealed by the sun's glare. At 15,000 feet, she fired 4 AIM-120 missiles in rapid succession, one for each F-35. The missiles dropped away from her aircraft and activated their own guidance systems, streaking toward targets that had no idea they were being engaged. The first indication the F-35 pilots had of incoming missiles was the proximity. Warning in their cockpits. Missiles inbound. Multiple missiles. Brake left. Chaff and flares. The formation scattered as 4 of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft frantically maneuvered to defeat incoming missiles fired by a jet they dismissed as obsolete. One by one, the simulation computers registered hits. Viper 2, you're dead. RTB. Viper 3, simulated kill. RTB. Viper 4, you're out. RTB. Reed's voice, tight with stress. "Ghost, where are you?" Mara's response came from directly behind him, so close that he could see her raptor in his mirrors. "Right here, Viper 1. The final missile tone sounded. Viper 1, simulated kill. Exercise terminated. Silence filled the radio frequency. In the observation bunker, Ashford stared at the tactical display in shock. 4 blue icons marked as dead, and 1 red icon calmly returning to base. The elapsed time, 4 minutes and 37 seconds. General Hayes turned to Colonel Malloy. "Colonel, I need to speak with Captain Keene immediately after landing." Ashford stood abruptly, his face flushed. "Ma'am, there must have been a system malfunction. No single aircraft could defeat 4 modern fighters in a beyond visual range." Engagement. Hayes fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. "Lieutenant Colonel, are you suggesting our simulation systems are unreliable?" "No, ma'am, but then perhaps you should reconsider your assessment of what constitutes an obsolete platform." As the aircraft landed and taxied to the ramp, crowds of personnel gathered to witness something unprecedented. Mara climbed down from her cockpit to find Reed waiting for her, helmet off, expression mixing embarrassment with genuine respect. "How?" he asked simply. "You fought the aircraft," she replied. "I fought the mission." General Hayes approached, her aide carrying a thick folder. "Captain Keene, I've been reviewing your service record. 3 combat tours, 47 confirmed enemy kills, and a distinguished flying cross you never mentioned in your personnel file." Mara stood at attention. "Ma'am, I let my flying speak for itself." Hayes nodded slowly. "It certainly does. I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Major, an assignment as Chief Instructor at the Fighter Weapons School. The Air Force needs pilots who understand that the person in the cockpit matters more than the year the aircraft was built." Across the tarmac, Ashford watched his carefully planned ambush dissolve into his own professional humiliation. The woman he'd tried to destroy had just proven that experience, skill, and tactical thinking could overcome any technological advantage. But more importantly, she'd proven something that would resonate throughout the Air Force for years to come. In the right hands, there was no such thing as an obsolete fighter. 3 days after the demonstration, Mara found herself in a conference room at the Pentagon, surrounded by stars on shoulders and minds focused on a single question. How had one pilot in an obsolete aircraft defeated 4 of their most advanced fighters? General Hayes led the discussion, her aide displaying detailed telemetry from the engagement. Captain Keene, walk us through your tactical decision-making process. Mara stood before the projection screen, using a laser pointer to highlight key moments. The opposition expected me to fight their fight, beyond visual range, dependent on radar, trapped by their jamming. Instead, I used their technology against them. She clicked to the next slide. The F-35's advanced radar is also its weakness in a stealth engagement. Every time they painted me, they revealed their exact position. I went passive, collected their emissions, and built a targeting picture without transmitting anything myself. Air Force Chief of Staff General Robert Chun leaned forward. But how did you defeat their jamming? Our intelligence suggests enemy aircraft with similar capabilities shouldn't be able to penetrate coordinated electronic warfare. Sir, the F-22's electronic warfare suite was designed to operate in exactly this environment. We just haven't been training pilots to use it properly. Mara highlighted the technical specifications. The EPG-77 radar can function as a passive receiver, turning enemy transmissions into a tactical advantage. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. They'd been so focused on the F-22's age that they'd forgotten its original design purpose: defeating numerically superior forces in contested airspace. General Hayes turned to the acquisition officer. Colonel Morrison, what would it cost to upgrade our entire F-22 fleet with Captain Keene's tactical modifications? Ma'am, the software updates she implemented are already available. The training, however, double quotes, Morrison consulted his tablet. We'd need to completely revise our air-to-air combat curriculum. Do it, Hayes ordered. And I want Captain Keene leading the development. After the meeting, Mara walked through the Pentagon's corridors with a different kind of weight on her shoulders. She'd proven her point about the aircraft, but now came the harder challenge: changing an entire institution's mindset about experience versus technology. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Ruiz. Captain, you need to see the base gossip page. Check your email. Mara found a quiet corner and opened her laptop. The unofficial base newsletter, normally filled with sports scores and dining hall complaints, featured a front-page story titled "Ghost Pilot Rewrites the Book on Air Combat." But it wasn't the article that caught her attention. It was the comment section. Dozens of pilots from bases around the world were sharing their own stories. Veteran aviators who'd been passed over for newer aircraft. Experienced instructors reassigned to desk jobs to make room for younger pilots with less experience but newer qualifications. A pattern of institutional bias that went far beyond one base in Nevada. One comment stood out, from a pilot at Langley Air Force Base. Same thing happened here. They grounded our most experienced pilot because her F-15 was too old for modern warfare. 3 months later, 2 rookie pilots crashed their F-35s during basic maneuver training. Maybe we should ask who's really obsolete. That evening, Mara received a call from Colonel James Parker, commander of the 94th Fighter Squadron at Langley. Major Keene, congratulations on a promotion, by the way. I need to ask you something. How would you feel about expanding your tactical revolution? Sir, I've got 12 F-22s gathering dust because bureaucrats decided they're not worth maintaining. But I've also got a squadron of pilots who learned to fly on video games instead of experience. What if we combined old aircraft with older wisdom? Mara listened as Parker outlined his proposal. A joint training program pairing experienced pilots in F-22s with younger aviators in F-35s, teaching them to work together rather than compete. The old birds providing tactical wisdom, the new jets contributing advanced sensors and networking. Sir, that would require significant command approval, Parker chuckled. Major, after what you did at Nellis, I don't think approval will be a problem. The Pentagon's suddenly very interested in maximizing the potential of our existing assets. Within a week, Mara found herself at Langley, walking through hangars filled with covered F-22s. The aircraft looked like sleeping giants there. Stealth profiles still elegant despite years of storage. Beside each Raptor stood a pilot, not young hotshots, but veterans like herself. Men and women who'd been sidelined by policies that valued new over experienced. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, call sign Phoenix, had been the Top Gun instructor at Miramar before being reassigned to a desk job. Major Frank Delacroix, Cajun, had flown 200 combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan before being told his A-10 experience wasn't relevant to modern warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, Thunder, had commanded an entire squadron before being shuffled into logistics because her F-16 was being phased out. We're not just bringing aircraft back to life, Parker told the assembled group. We're proving that experience is our most valuable asset. The program they developed would become known as Ghost Squadron, officially the Advanced Tactical Integration Unit. 12 F-22s crewed by pilots with an average of 15 years of combat experience, paired with F-35 squadrons for joint operations. The older pilots would provide tactical leadership and combat wisdom, while the newer jets contributed advanced sensors and coordination capabilities. But first, they had to prove the concept worked. Mara stood before the group in the same briefing room where she'd once been dismissed and outlined their first exercise. Red Flag 25-2, largest air combat exercise in 5 years. Coalition forces against a peer adversary scenario with advanced surface-to-air missiles, electronic warfare, and numerical superiority. Phoenix raised her hand. What's our role? Where? The wild card, Mara replied. Nobody expects us to be there. While the main force conducts traditional operations, we'll demonstrate what happens when you combine stealth, experience, and tactical flexibility. Cajun grinned. Sounds like we're about to ruin somebody's day. Exactly, Mara confirmed. And this time, the whole world will be watching. As the pilots dispersed to begin intensive training, Mara received a message on her secure phone. It was from General Hayes. Major, the Secretary of Defense has personally approved your Ghost Squadron concept. You have unlimited resources and complete operational authority. Don't let us down. Mara looked out at the flight line where 12 F-22 Raptors were being prepared for their return to combat status. Each aircraft represented not just advanced technology, but decades of pilot experience that had nearly been discarded. The real fight wasn't just about proving aircraft capabilities anymore. It was about proving that in an age of artificial intelligence and automated systems, human experience still mattered most. And in 3 weeks, at Red Flag 25-2, they'd prove it to the world. Red Flag 25-2 drew observers from 23 nations and every major defense contractor in the world. The exercise simulated a full-scale conflict between NATO forces and a peer adversary with advanced air defenses, electronic warfare capabilities, and numerical superiority. For 2 weeks, the skies over Nevada would host the largest air combat exercise in a decade. In the main briefing auditorium at Nellis, over 400 pilots and support personnel received their mission assignments. Traditional squadron commanders outlined conventional strategies, establish air superiority through coordinated strikes, suppress enemy air defenses with precision munitions, maintain persistent surveillance with advanced sensors. But buried on page 47 of the operations order, in a section marked Special Operations, was a single line: Advanced Tactical Integration Unit will conduct independent operations under separate command authority. Most participants skip that section entirely. Lieutenant Colonel Ashford, now serving as Deputy Operations Officer after his humiliation months earlier, noticed the entry and felt his stomach tighten. He tried to bury Mara Keene's career, only to watch her rise to prominence. With Pentagon backing and unlimited resources. Now she was back, commanding a unit of hand-picked veterans in aircraft everyone had written off. During the pre-exercise briefing, Ashford approached Colonel Bradley Hoffman, the exercise director. "Sir, I'm concerned about this Ghost Squadron integration. Their F-22s lack modern data link capabilities. They could compromise Blue Force coordination." Hoffman, a pragmatic officer who'd watched Mara's demonstration footage multiple times, shook his head. "Colonel, Major King's unit has separate objectives. They won't interfere with conventional operations. But sir, if they go off script, then we'll see what happens when experienced pilots are given the freedom to fight their own way," Hoffman interrupted. "Isn't that why we run these exercises? To learn?" On the opposite side of the base, Ghost Squadron conducted their own briefing in a secure hangar. 12 F-22 Raptors sat in a line, each bearing the faded paint and patched panels of aircraft pulled from storage. But their engines hummed with perfect precision, and their cockpits gleamed with updated avionics. Mara stood before her pilots, pointing to a detailed intelligence map. Red Force has 180 aircraft, integrated air defenses, and electronic warfare. Coverage across 50,000 square miles. Blue Force will conduct conventional operations with 240 modern fighters. Phoenix studied the display. "Where do we fit in?" "We don't," Mara replied. "While everyone else fights the expected battle, we're going to demonstrate what stealth was designed for. Penetrating enemy territory and striking targets they don't think we can reach." She clicked to the next slide, showing satellite imagery of a heavily defended command bunker 200 miles behind enemy lines. Surface-to-air missile sites surrounded it in overlapping coverage zones, with multiple radar installations and mobile air defense systems. Red Force's Exercise Command Center. Mara continued. "Intelligence considers it unreachable during the first week of operations. Conventional wisdom says we need to roll back their air defenses systematically before attempting deep strikes." Cajun grinned. "Let me guess. We're going to prove conventional wisdom wrong." "Day 1, Hour 6, Mara confirmed. While Blue Force establishes air superiority over the front lines, we penetrate deep and eliminate their command structure. Mission success will be measured by how quickly Red Force loses coordination." Thunder raised a concern. 12 aircraft against that level of air defense? Even with stealth, the odds are terrible, Mara finished, which is exactly why no one expects it. Red Force will position their best assets to counter the main attack. They'll leave token defenses around the command center because they assume it's safe. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering ingress routes, timing coordination, and contingency plans. But the core concept remained elegantly simple. While everyone else fought the battle they expected, Ghost Squadron would fight the war they didn't see coming. As the pilots dispersed to final preparations, Mara received a message from General Hayes. "Major, you have presidential attention on this one. Success validates everything we've discussed about experience and capability. Failure, she didn't need to finish." The exercise began at 06:00 hours with conventional airstrikes against Red Force border installations. F-35s and F-A-18s swept across the Nevada desert, engaging surface-to-air missiles and enemy interceptors in carefully orchestrated scenarios. Electronic warfare aircraft jammed communications, while reconnaissance drones provided real-time targeting data. From the observation bunker, Defense contractors and foreign military officials watched their equipment perform exactly as designed. Modern warfare unfolded according to doctrine, with advanced sensors and precision weapons systematically dismantling enemy capabilities. But 200 miles away, 12 F-22 Raptors lifted off from a remote auxiliary field, invisible to both friendly and enemy radar systems. They climbed to 45,000 feet and disappeared into the vast Nevada sky like ghosts from another era. In the main operations center, digital displays showed the conventional battle progressing according to plan. Blue icons advanced methodically, while red defenders fell back in organized fashion. Exercise controllers monitored radio chatter, fuel consumption, and ammunition expenditure with scientific precision. Nobody noticed the data gap in grid square 47 Delta, where sensor coverage had mysteriously gone dark. Ashford watched the tactical display with growing unease. Ghost Squadron should have appeared on the friendly aircraft plot by now, but their transponders remained inactive. "Sir," he approached the exercise director, "we've lost contact with the F-22 unit." Hoffman glanced at the display. Their mission parameters include communications blackout. They'll check in when required. But sir, without data link coordination, they could fly into a Blue Force engagement zone. Colonel, Hoffman's voice carried a warning edge. Major Keen's unit has separate operational authority. Your job is managing conventional forces. At 0800 hours, Red Force controllers noticed their first anomaly. A surface-to-air missile site went offline without explanation, not destroyed, simply ... silent. 30 minutes later, a second site reported equipment malfunction. Then a third. Probably electronic warfare effects, the Red Force commander explained to his staff. Blue Force is testing new jamming capabilities, but the pattern was wrong. Electronic warfare created noise and confusion. This was different, surgical, precise, like someone was methodically dismantling their defensive network from the inside. At 0900 hours, Ghost Squadron reached their first waypoint, 150 miles behind enemy lines. They'd penetrated the most heavily defended airspace in the exercise without triggering a single alarm. Phoenix's voice crackled over secure frequency. "Lead. Sensors show clear path to target area." "Copy. Thunder, Cajun, take your flights and establish outer perimeter. Phoenix, Rodriguez, flight with me for final approach." The command bunker sat in a valley surrounded by simulated SAM sites and radar installations. According to exercise parameters, it was protected by overlapping coverage zones that should detect any approaching aircraft within 50 miles. But the designers hadn't considered pilots who understood that stealth wasn't just about technology. It was about thinking like shadows. Mara led her flight through a canyon approach that used terrain masking to avoid radar coverage. At 500 feet above ground level, flying barely above stall speed, the F-22s moved like whispers through the desert landscape. At 0947 hours, they achieved weapons release parameters. Ghost Lead Rifle, Mara called, simulating missile launch. Against the command bunker. Ghost 2, Rifle. Ghost 3, Rifle. In the exercise control room, alarms began sounding. Red Force's command structure had just taken simulated hits from an attack they never saw coming. Controllers scrambled to understand how Blue Force had achieved deep penetration so early in the exercise. "Sir," a technician called out, "Red Force is requesting explanation for the command bunker attack. They're claiming system malfunction." Hoffman studied the data feeds, then smiled slowly. "Tell Red Force that Major Keen's Ghost Squadron just demonstrated why experience matters more than equipment age." But the real revelation came 30 minutes later, when conventional Blue Force finally encountered serious Red Force resistance. Without their command structure coordinating defensive efforts, Red Force units fought as isolated elements instead of integrated systems. What should have been a week-long battle for air superiority was achieved in 6 hours. Ashford stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 12 old F-22s had just changed the entire exercise outcome by proving that sometimes the indirect approach was more effective than overwhelming force. In the observation gallery, defense contractors and foreign officials were frantically taking notes. The woman they dismissed as a relic from the past had just demonstrated tactical concepts that could revolutionize air warfare doctrine. But Mara wasn't finished. As Ghost Squadron returned to base, she keyed her radio for one final transmission that would echo through military aviation for years. Control, Ghost Lead, mission complete. Recommend updating your assumptions about what obsolete means. The secure conference room in the Pentagon's E-ring buzzed with tension as senior military leaders, defense contractors, and intelligence officials gathered for an emergency session. The Red Flag 25-2 exercise had been suspended after Ghost Squadron's unprecedented performance raised fundamental questions about air combat doctrine, stealth technology, and the role of pilot experience in modern warfare. General Hayes presided over the meeting, her expression grave as she reviewed the exercise data. Gentlemen, ladies, we need to discuss what happened in Nevada and what it means for our national defense strategy. Secretary of Defense Patricia Reynolds, who had flown in from Washington specifically for this meeting, addressed the room. Major Keen's demonstration has implications beyond military tactics. Our allies are asking why we've been retiring capable aircraft and experienced pilots. Our adversaries are studying the footage to understand our actual capabilities versus our stated limitations. Mara sat at the far end of the conference table, still in her flight suit, flanked by General Hayes and Colonel Parker. Across from her sat a panel of defense contractors, acquisition officers, and strategic planners who had spent years advocating for newer, more expensive systems. Dr. Marcus Webb, Chief Technology Officer for Lockheed Martin's F-35 program, leaned forward aggressively. Madam Secretary, with respect, one exercise doesn't invalidate decades of technological advancement. The F-22 program was canceled for good reasons: cost, maintenance requirements, limited multi-role capabilities. Dr. Webb, General. Hayes interrupted. Major Keen's unit achieved in 6 hours what our models predicted would take a week. They did it with aircraft you've repeatedly called obsolete and pilots your recommendations would have forced into retirement. Webb's face reddened. The exercise parameters were unrealistic. No enemy would leave their command structure so poorly defended. Mara spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. Dr. Webb, that's exactly the kind of thinking that makes such attacks possible. You assume the enemy will fight your fight, using your tactics according to your timeline. Major, Webb shot back, your stunt worked once, under controlled conditions, against opponents who weren't shooting back. Real combat is different. The room fell silent. Every person present knew Mara's combat record: 47 confirmed kills across 3 tours, including engagements where she'd been outnumbered and outgunned. Webb had just challenged the combat credentials of one of the most experienced fighter pilots in the Air Force. General Chun, the Air Force Chief of Staff, broke the silence. Dr. Webb, Major Keen has more real combat experience than anyone in this room. Perhaps we should listen to what she learned before dismissing it. Secretary Reynolds nodded toward Mara. Major, explain to us how 12 supposedly obsolete aircraft just revolutionized air combat doctrine. Mara stood and walked to the presentation screen. Ma'am, the issue isn't the age of the aircraft. It's how we've been thinking about warfare itself. She clicked to a slide showing exercise telemetry. For 20 years, we've focused on building better machines, Faster computers, longer-range missiles, more advanced sensors. But we forgot that warfare is ultimately about human decision-making under uncertainty. She highlighted specific moments from the exercise. Ghost Squadron succeeded because we understood something our opponents didn't. Stealth isn't about being invisible. It's about being unexpected. Technology gives you capabilities, but experience teaches you when and how to use them. Dr. Webb interrupted. That's philosophical nonsense. Modern warfare requires integrated systems, real-time data sharing, and coordinated precision strikes. Your F-22s can't even communicate with current NATO data links. Exactly, Mara replied. Which meant Red Force couldn't track our communications, predict our movements, or coordinate countermeasures. Sometimes, the greatest advantage is being outside the system everyone expects you to use. Colonel James Morrison, the Pentagon's Chief Acquisition Officer, studied the data. Major, what are you proposing? That we abandon technological advancement? No, sir. I'm proposing we stop abandoning human advancement. Mara clicked to her next slide, showing pilot experience levels across the Air Force. In 1991, our average fighter pilot had 12 years of experience. Today, it's 6 years. We're retiring experienced aviators to make room for younger pilots who learn to fly on simulators instead of in combat. She pulled up specific statistics. That made several officials shift uncomfortably. We've grounded 400 experienced pilots in the last 5 years because their aircraft were deemed outdated. That's 4,000 years of combined combat experience sitting behind desks or forced into early retirement. General Hayes added her support. The Major is correct. We've been so focused on platform modernization that we've ignored pilot development. Ghost Squadron proves that experience can overcome technological disadvantages. Dr. Webb made one last attempt to defend his position. Even if that's true, the F-22 program costs too much to maintain. Each aircraft requires 30 hours of maintenance for every flight hour. Mara smiled slightly. Dr. Webb, how many maintenance hours did your F-35 program require last year? Webb hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The F-35's maintenance requirements were significantly higher than the F-22's, a fact that had become increasingly embarrassing for the program. Secretary Reynolds consulted her notes. According to the JAL report, F-35 maintenance averaged 47 hours per flight hour in fiscal year 2024. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The obsolete F-22 was actually more efficient to operate than its supposed replacement. General Chun broke the silence. Major Keane, what would you recommend moving forward? Mara had prepared for this moment for months. Sir, I recommend the Ghost Squadron concept be expanded to a full wing. 12 squadrons of experienced pilots in F-22s, integrated with conventional forces for specific mission sets. Deep penetration, electronic warfare, and tactical leadership roles that leverage experience over technology. She clicked to her final slide, showing proposed organizational changes. Additionally, we should establish experience retention programs that keep veteran pilots in cockpits instead of promoting them to desk jobs. Combat aviation is a skill that takes decades to master. We shouldn't waste that investment. Webb stood abruptly. This is madness. You're asking us to rebuild an entire program around aircraft we've already decided to phase out. Secretary. Reynolds fixed him with a steady stare. Dr. Webb, Major Keane just proved that our decision-making process may have been flawed. Are you suggesting we shouldn't correct our mistakes? The meeting continued for 2 more hours, but the fundamental shift had already occurred. When faced with empirical evidence that experience could overcome technological disadvantage, institutional resistance began to crumble. As participants filed out, General Hayes approached Mara privately. Major, you understand what you've done here? You've just challenged 20 years of defense acquisition strategy. Mara nodded. Ma'am, sometimes the biggest risk is continuing to do what isn't working. Hayes smiled. Well, you're about to find out if the Pentagon agrees. The secretary wants a full implementation plan on her desk in 30 days. Walking through the Pentagon corridors, Mara felt the weight of expectation and opportunity. She'd proven her point about aircraft capabilities and pilot experience, but now came the hardest part, changing an entire institution's approach to warfare itself. Her phone buzzed with a message from Phoenix. Lead. Just saw the news. When? Do we start training the next generation? Mara typed back. As soon as we figure out how to teach what can't be learned in simulators. The real revolution was just beginning. 6 months later, Mara stood on the flight line at Nellis Air Force Base, watching the morning sun illuminate the largest gathering of F-22 Raptors since the program's original deployment. 4 squadrons of the stealth fighters sat in perfect formation, their engines warming in the desert air as experienced pilots completed pre-flight preparations. The Ghost Wing had become reality. What started as 12 forgotten aircraft and 12 sideline pilots had grown into a 48-aircraft unit that had fundamentally changed how the Air Force approached air combat. The Pentagon had invested $2.3 billion in upgrading mothballed F-22s and implementing the experience retention programs Mara had proposed. More importantly, they promoted 127 veteran pilots back to flight status and established new career tracks that kept experienced aviators in cockpits instead of conference rooms. Major, excuse me, Colonel Keene, a familiar voice called. From behind her, Mara turned to see Reed approaching, now wearing the rank insignia of a lieutenant colonel and the patch of the Ghost Wing's 2nd Squadron. The former base hotshot had become one of her most effective squadron commanders, his competitive nature channeled into developing the next generation of combat pilots. Still feels weird hearing that, Mara replied, referring to her recent promotion to full colonel and appointment as Ghost Wing commander. How's the new class progressing? Reed grinned. 12 pilots, average age 28, average experience level 8 years. They're finally starting to understand that they're F-35s are tools, not crutches. The integration program had exceeded every expectation. Young pilots flying advanced F-35s worked alongside veteran aviators in F-22s, learning tactical thinking that no simulator could teach. Combat effectiveness had increased by 340% across participating units, while accident rates had dropped to historic lows. Across the tarmac, Sergeant Ruiz supervised a group of maintenance technicians working on one of the Raptors. The old mechanic had been promoted to Chief Master Sergeant and put in charge of the entire Ghost Wing maintenance operation. His quiet expertise had proven as valuable as any pilot's experience. Colonel, Phoenix approached with a tablet displaying the morning's intelligence briefing. We've got visitors incoming. Mara reviewed the flight manifest. Delegations from 12 allied nations, senior Pentagon officials, and, most surprisingly, Dr. Marcus Webb from Lockheed Martin. The man who had fought hardest against the Ghost Wing concept was now leading a team studying how to implement similar programs with international partners. At 1,000 hours, the demonstration began. Unlike the carefully scripted exercises that defense contractors typically organized, this was a realistic combat scenario developed by the pilots themselves. Ghost Wing faced a simulated peer adversary with advanced air defenses, electronic warfare capabilities, and numerical superiority, the kind of threat environment that had seemed impossible to penetrate just months earlier. The engagement lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, the visiting officials sat in stunned silence as they reviewed the results. Ghost Wing had achieved complete air superiority while suffering zero losses, penetrated the most heavily defended airspace. In the exercise, and eliminated high-value targets that conventional wisdom said were unreachable. During the post-flight briefing, General Hayes addressed the international delegation. What you've witnessed today represents a fundamental shift in how we approach air warfare. Technology remains important, but experience is irreplaceable. Dr. Webb, looking considerably humbler than during their Pentagon confrontation, raised his hand. Colonel Keane, my company would like to propose a partnership. We want to modify our training programs to emphasize the human factors you've demonstrated. Mara nodded diplomatically. Dr. Webb, we'd welcome that collaboration. But remember, you can't simulate 20 years of experience. Some things have to be earned in the air. After the briefing, Mara walked alone to the original hangar where her journey had begun. The old F-22 that started everything sat in the place of honor, its faded paint now bearing the insignia of the Ghost Wing flagship. A small plaque near the nose read, "In recognition of proving that obsolete is a state of mind, not a condition of equipment." Her phone rang, a call from the White House. Secretary Reynolds was on the line with news that would reshape military aviation for decades. Colonel, the President has signed the Military Experience Preservation Act. No pilot with more than 10 years of experience can be involuntarily retired due to platform changes. Additionally, Congress has approved funding for Ghost Wing expansion to all major Air Force bases. Mara closed her eyes and felt a satisfaction deeper than any personal victory. Ma'am, what about the international program? NATO wants to implement Ghost Wing concepts across the alliance. You'll be working with pilots from 15 countries to develop integrated experience sharing programs. As the call ended, Mara looked out at the flight line where a new generation of pilots was learning that the most advanced computer was still the human brain, and the most sophisticated software was hard-earned experience. Ashford appeared beside her. The former antagonist now served as Ghost Wing's operations officer, his administrative skills proving valuable in managing the complex program he'd once tried to destroy. Colonel, he said quietly, I owe you an apology, and more than that, I owe you thanks. What you've built here, it's changing everything. Mara studied his face, seeing genuine respect where once there had been dismissive arrogance. Derek, we all believed what we were taught. The difference is being willing to learn when the evidence changes. That evening, Mara stood under the Nevada stars with her original Ghost Squadron pilots. Phoenix had been promoted to command the international training program. Cajun led the electronic warfare integration unit. Thunder commanded the advanced tactics development squadron. Each had found their place in an air force that finally valued what they brought to the fight. So what's next, boss? Phoenix asked. Mara smiled, watching an F-22 taxi past with a 25-year-old pilot and a 45-year-old instructor sharing the same aircraft. We keep proving that the most dangerous thing in any cockpit is someone who's been there before and learned from it. The Ghost Wing had become more than a military unit. It was proof that in an age of artificial intelligence and automated systems, human experience remained the ultimate strategic advantage. And as long as there were pilots willing to push beyond what others thought possible, the sky would never belong to machines alone. 3 years later, as Colonel Mara Ghost Keane prepared for a final flight before promotion to Brigadier General, she knew that the real victory wasn't in the dogfights or demonstrations. It was in the young pilot walking toward her F-22, wearing the confidence that came from being trained by someone who'd been there, done that, and lived to pass on the wisdom. The obsolete fighter and the experienced pilot had proven that sometimes the most powerful force in warfare wasn't the newest technology. It was the oldest truth. That skill, courage, and experience would always find a way to win. And in hangars, Around the world, veteran pilots were climbing into aircraft that others had written off, ready to prove that point again and again, one flight at a time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.